And we're back in the San Francisco studio for the White Night Summer. Welcome back. And now we're going to have a very, very interesting panel discussion, sound design in AAA games. And right now in the studio, I'm going to have some great experts in the area. We're going to welcome Robert, Senior Technical Audio Director at Microsoft, Jason, Principal Audio Lead at Avalanche Studio, Mark, Audio Director at Gearbox Software, Jay, Audio Director at EA Industrial Toys, and the moderator is going to be Andy, Senior Development Relations Manager at Dolby. And I've got all the guys here with me already. Hello.
Hello.
Oh my God, I feel so privileged right now.
I feel so flattered.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Are you based in the same place, or are we talking different countries now?
We're spread across the United States. So Rob's up in Seattle, Mark's over in Dallas, Texas, Jason's all the way over on the East Coast in New York City, and Jay is just down the coast from me in LA.
And yet we're all here in the same place.
Here we are.
Yeah. Thank you very much, guys, for taking time and joining the session today. We're super excited, and all yours.
Right. Well, hello, everyone. As introduced, my name's Andy Vaughan. I work at Dolby Laboratories, and I have the honor of working with AAA studios around game content. Over the years, I've made acquaintance with some of some really great people in game audio, and I have the honor of having a panel of 4 of them here today. We've already done introductions light, and I want to get to those introductions next. But on this panel, we're just going to talk about game audio, where it's been, and where we're going. And so to lead things off, I'd like to do some deeper introductions, if I may. And I'd like to hear, we know who you are, but let's talk about some of the titles you've worked on, some of the hardware you've worked on, what's your history in game audio? And we'll start with Rob, and I'll call everybody out to keep things orderly. Go ahead, Rob.
All right. Yeah. Well, you're looking at a very old man in the games audio industry. I started my career at a small little development house called Manley & Associates back in 1992. We did children's entertainment games. We did Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Boy. From there, after a few years, the company got purchased by Electronic Arts, turned into EA Seattle. Spent 6 years on the Need for Speed franchise. In 2002, broke off from EA, started my own audio outsourcing company, did that for 11 years, worked with dozens and dozens of publishers, about 100 different games over 11 years, and titles like Guild Wars, the original franchise, cracked down to just a lot of really fun titles. And then in 2012, got an offer from the Central Media Group at Xbox to come join them. And so I've been at Microsoft for the past 8 years, working in publishing with the platform team, and basically leading the audio community across Microsoft, working with all of our first-party studios.
Excellent. You call yourself old. You're a young soul, Rob. I know it.
Yeah.
Mark, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Mark Petty. I'm the audio director for Gearbox Software. I've been with Gearbox for 14 years. So that makes me an old man within Gearbox. Prior to Gearbox, I was in music production, mixed records and demos, and some TV work for a decade or so. It's kind of an interesting story. I had a band that I was working with, and the main songwriter in that band was the old audio director for Gearbox. And this was back in 2004. They needed some sound design support on Road to Hill 30 by Brothers in Arms, which was Gearbox's first IP. So I came on and contracted for about 8 months, then went back to doing music. And then in 2006, that old audio director decided to leave, wanted to know if I could get him through some demos. Anyway, that was on the last Hell's Highway, I believe, which was also Brothers in Arms, but they were also starting to work on Borderlands 1. So I got him through some demos, ended up coming on as a sound designer, and then sort of just evolved from there in the game world. It was super interesting to me to go from linear media to interactive media, and that sort of transition was a steep learning curve, but it was super interesting. And then in 2009, I believe, I became audio director here. Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2, Borderlands 3, the Duke Nukem stuff that we obtained, as well as Battleborn. So I've been with Gearbox through all of the titles. It's been a lot of fun.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Jason, how about you, man? Uh-oh, Jason, I think we got you on mute.
There we go. All right, great. Thank you. So yeah, my name's Jason Kanter. I'm the principal audio lead at Avalanche Studios in New York. Avalanche is it's a Swedish-owned company, so we have a bunch of studios spread out, a couple in Sweden, and one just opened up in Leeds. No, Leeds? No. Liverpool, England. So I've been with Avalanche for a little over 8 years now, 8 years and some change. I've been in professional audio for almost as long as I can remember, pretty much out of high school. I worked in music production, much like Mark, just recording, mixing, producing bands, working on records. And from there, I started gravitating towards games around like the early 2000s. I've worked a bunch on freelance stuff. I worked on Sims 2 as a dialogue editor for Simlish, which was really interesting. If you've ever played Sims. I've worked in on what else? Barbie. There was a Barbie high school mysteries game I'm incredibly proud of. One of the highlights of my career. Aside from that, did a Bioshock 2, I think it was. Some other stuff here and there, but most recently for Avalanche, I've worked on the Just Cause 3 and 4 titles, and we're currently working on a new project that is yet unannounced.
I will tell you, Rico hates me. I cannot pilot that guy into squirrel suits still, but I love that game.
Let's keep at it.
I'm going to keep trying. Last but not least, Jay, take it away, man.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So I'm Jay Weinland. I'm currently audio director at Industrial Toys at Electronic Arts in Pasadena, California. Most of my career I spent in Seattle. We can argue about who's actually the oldest among us, but I think I win. But in any case, I started off actually working with Rob on some of the EA Seattle titles. He mentioned Need for Speed. I also worked on the FIFA team, so did some soccer titles for a while. And then I went off and spent 18 years at Bungie, working on titles like starting with Oni, and then Halo CE, Halo 2, Halo 3, ODST Reach, and then on to Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. And only left Seattle after both of my kids got out of high school and went off to college. So we've been empty nesting a bit. We spent last year in Edinburgh, Scotland. And now we're in Pasadena and enjoying ourselves and still making games, just of the mobile variety instead of the AAA console variety.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining. For those who are watching the panel, there's a lot of history and a lot of talent in making fun for your ears on this panel. And so, these people are brought together for a very good reason, because we want to talk about the evolution of game audio. And there's no better way to really talk about that than to talk to people who know where it's come from. And so the first question I would throw out there is that, over time, what's made your game audio more compelling over generations? I know we started with some pretty rudimentary stuff, and we've progressed all the way to some pretty fantastic stuff. There's been a lot of technology and a lot of bits in the way there. So what's really made a big difference for you, and what's been super disappointing? And don't worry if it's something that I get paid to push. It's fine. Jay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, you could start with the easy one, which is, we used to mess around with 8-bit 11K sounds. And so even just the raw numbers of going back to the days where they really were bleeps and bloops, and we didn't have much bandwidth to play, good high quality audio. And today, we're all recording in 24-bit, 48, 24-bit, 96. We're doing all our recordings and all our mastering and everything at the same level that that movie guys and the TV guys are. It's the fidelity has just grown leaps and bounds to really catch up with the rest of media that people consume in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think back to the Super Nintendo days. We had 56K of memory for all of our audio. That included all the MIDI, all the samples, all of that. From my perspective, I think that we're now at a place where we have the technologies to completely immerse our gamers in the audio space, and with our spatial audio technologies, our acoustic technologies. What Jay was talking about with the fidelity of everything. But it didn't used to be that way. I mean, we started off with having to deal with mono sound, and then we moved to stereo, and 5.1 and then 7.1. But now we're at a place where that capability for our technologies allows us to just put the gamer into the space from an audio perspective.
Jason, thoughts?
Yeah. I would add that I think we're at a point now where technology is not necessarily making the sound better. It's just making our job easier and sort of I don't want to say unleashing our creativity because it sounds so corny, but it is sort of what it's doing. It's just you can't really. Sound designers are being less and less restricted by the capabilities of the technology, and also you have standardization of tools where with Wise, with Fmod, these platforms that come out that it's kind of it makes it much easier as a sound designer to learn a set of tools and go from studio to studio, just being able to do your job rather than having to learn an entirely new tool set and workflow.
Yeah. Mark, we've talked about that a lot, actually, about the crucial skill sets being more software-based and more tool-based than necessarily anything else. If you have people with those skills, you can teach them. Is that still true with the technology we have?
Yeah, to sort of jump off of Jason's point, I was thinking a lot about sort of implementation. Like I remember back on Health 30, if you wanted anything done that was outside of simply volume and attenuation, it was a code task. And we evolve into this world now where you can get inside of WWise and create super complex systems and just pass an event. And this is really, changed a lot for the sound design end of things, because the things that we were trapped, or I was trapped in a box, created box 10 years ago, is not so much the thing anymore, because you can do it yourself and you have that creative control and you can develop systems outside of code, and just having that flexibility has made a huge difference for sure.
Thanks. Well, so I think that kind of leads us to the next obvious question, which is how far can we take this with technology? Are we to a point now that a player's ears are as informed as their eyes are? Are we able to claim parity across video and audio, and are they complementary, or do we have farther to go? Mark, why don't you go first?
In some ways, I actually think that because of all of the advancements in technology and sort of where we're at, I find myself at times actually being subtractive and starting to pull things out just for the sake of clarity and especially information to the player. The addition of expanded surround formats and being able to be more positional with height and other types of I'll call them tricks, but they're not really tricks. But being able to present information in different ways to players and exploring that has become a big focus for me, especially like mixing BL3 and Atmos, and then moving forward and looking that as a retrospective and starting to understand how we can be better at that. I think you can inundate the player with too much information, and especially, you look at competitive shooters and things like that. Like obviously, it becomes a matter of clarity and less about just, I guess, clutter. So I know we have talked about like even and it's a topic, but accessibility, like sight impaired, those kinds of things. I think that the expanded spatial formats are super exciting in that arena.
Nice. How about you, Jay? What do you
Yeah,
think? How further can we go?
Well, I totally agree initially with Mark's feeling of just saying like it's time to be, if you want clarity, subtract the sort of the place you have to go. I think there was a long time when people were just saying we're going to make sure everything plays all the sound, and so you just had this indiscernible amount of audio coming at the ears that you're not really getting the important information that you need. And especially as mobile becomes more and more of a thing, like we really have to be thinking about how we restrict voices, how we have less hit on the processors and on all the, we have to make sure that we are not taking too big of a bite out of the pie that's so easy to do on the AAA consoles because they have so much power in them. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to. I think that the future is going to be less is more. I think now we're really figuring out the clarity of it, making sure that they're getting as much informational things from the audio as they possibly can.
Gotcha. In my hackneyed comparison, Jason, do you subscribe to the Marie Kondo, school of audio work? Less is more, and throw it out if it's not bringing your processor joy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to answer your initial question of parity between the visual and the oral sonics, I think that visuals probably still have a ways to go to catch up to sound. As photo real is always sort of the holy grail of graphics, and I mean, things sound real. They sound as real as when you recorded them, pretty much. So I don't think that, I think we've reached a sort of fidelity plateau to a certain extent. I think it would be naive of me to say that there's nowhere else to go in terms of fidelity, but I think we've definitely achieved some kind of level where now it really just boils down to creative choices. And like Mark and Jay were saying, we really have, I think, the less is more approach and just trying to improve clarity and reduce clutter. It really all boils down to sophistication of our collective approach as sound designers. And we really have, we've come a long way. And that's obvious if you look towards past games. So a lot of it boils down to continuing this path of increased sophistication and our ability to sort of, I think a lot of it boils down to just the fashion of the day, whatever's popular in terms of a sound design and your approach. It's like certain things that we're doing today that everyone's very happy and jazzed about is, 10 years from now, we'll look back and not necessarily in horror, but say, oh, well, that was interesting. That's what they were doing back then. And it'll just be a different time.
Sure. Well, I think between beeps and boops and maybe overload of audio, there's definitely some things we look back on with nostalgia and with horror. I think you can't have one without the other, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, a topic's come up here, accessibility, and I really want to kind of toe into that one because I feel like, this is one of those things in 10 years we'll look back and say, oh, we did more, we could do more, and here's some of the things we learned about it. And I've had some interesting conversations with Robert specifically about how audio can be used for accessibility, both for non-sighted players, but also for players who can't hear as well. Rob, you want to kind of tear into some of just kind of the crazy thinking we've talked about?
Yeah, so You know, one of the things that has come naturally, I think, out of spatial audio, some of the more sophisticated acoustic systems that we have available to us, is that for gamers without sight, we are able to paint these detailed real world pictures of what things sound like. So using those technologies, we can give those players the ability to not only understand and play, but actually thrive within those game environments. You know, speaking a little bit to this, what we were just talking about with clarity, I think that's a large part of this, is using those tools, not overwhelming, but making clear space for that. That being said, and I've worked with a couple of titles where we've targeted gamers without sight, and one of the things we learned from that was that those folks can consume so much more audio simultaneously, filter it and understand it in their head. So that's one of the things that we should be thinking about when we're approaching gamers without sight, is that in some ways there can't be too much information coming from the audio space. One of the things that I've been working on lately that I think is sort of completes that picture of accessibility is for deaf and hard of hearing. And we have the tools and abilities now to grab information from the audio engine, game objects, what have you, and visualize those on screen. You see those with like the audio visualizer in Fortnite, or the simple subtitles out of Minecraft that go in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and point over zombie sound, spider over here. These are super important, and we're, you know, when we look to want to expand gaming for everyone, accessibility is huge. And I think we're now at a place where we have these tools and middleware that can help us give those gamers the ability to play, thrive.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, Jay, what do you think on a mobile platform? Has that changed shape, or is accessibility still every bit as front and center as Microsoft's putting it in some of their design efforts these days?
Well, I don't have years in the mobile industry behind me, so I'm just sort of learning where the trends and things are going to go. And you know, there's a big reports out there, especially for audio, that audio is not necessarily always consumed by mobile players. So I think mobile really has the challenge going forward to do an even better job of giving as much information through the audio that is coming through our games, to be able to allow players to get more than just what they're seeing. How much information can we get them? Because if they don't feel like they're getting good information via the audio, they'll just shut it off, or they just won't put it in their headphones. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see how going forward, if mobile really sort of catches up to where the consoles are, only in your hand, and the processors on these devices are getting more and more powerful, and the capabilities there. It just really needs the attention to detail.
Yeah, well, you touch on a tangential topic, Jay, and not to keep the focus on you, but I'm going to do it. How do we get people to turn audio back on mobile? Because we have heard that for a very long time. I switch it off when I start a mobile game.
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be my challenge, since this will be the first full mobile title that I've worked on. I've done a couple iPad titles back at Bungie, but it's a big challenge, right? It's how do you make sure that they can play the game better and that they get more entertainment value from the game if they have their headphones in, and that's going to be the key bit, that the game is more fun to play when you have the audio on, and you're better at it because of the information that you get that makes you more competitive than someone who's not listening. So that's going to be the challenge, I think. It would be nice if we could solve the Bluetooth latency at some point, because, you know, right now so many people are using wireless headphones, and it's just not the latency is just not a thing.
Yeah. Before we move on, Andy, before we move on from accessibility, I just wanted to chime in with the fact that it's become so much more of a relevant topic for us at Avalanche, as well as in particular for the title we're working on, just by way of the publisher wanting an increased focus on accessibility. It's sort of been like an all hands on deck effort between all the disciplines to, everybody, what can you do to increase accessibility? So it's been really cool, and something that I guess I should say shamefully, I've never really thought of before this point, where it's just like, oh, I only care about audio, and whoever that helps, great. But just changing my way of thinking in terms of not just how can audio help people who are blind, but also how can I make our sounds more accessible to people who are deaf? So it's just been an interesting way to think about it. And at Avalanche, we've actually started a panel, sort of a consultants panel on accessibility to just kind of
Nice.
help all games. And it's something I participate in because I'm colorblind. So that's something I've never really thought of as, why aren't games helping me? But it's, I've realized that it's just a way, if I can't see the red barrels that are on the screen, I don't know to blow them up to help me get through a level. And also there's a really cool course I'd want to point out to everybody listening, put on by Able Gamers. It's a certification course on accessibility, where it's like, we hosted one at Avalanche in New York. It was a 2-day course, and you pay, whatever the fee is, and it goes to Able Gamers, which is a nonprofit organization. And they give you the certification where they teach you all the ins and outs about accessibility and how to improve it for your game. And it's really cool. Highly recommend it. So we had
Cool.
2 people from our team that went through the course and are now certified.
One thing that I would add on to what Jason and something that Jay mentioned as well is that, in a lot of ways, when we look at making, say, audio better, more accessible, we're also making the game better for everybody. We use, say, spatial sound to give you the ability to pinpoint locations of sounds. Yes, that helps a gamer without sight, but it also helps you as a player to understand and react faster, pinpoint faster, be a better gamer. So it's I think that there is these crossovers here where we shouldn't be thinking about accessibility as just this separate thing. It actually can help everyone.
That's a really good point. Mark,
I
how about
agree.
you? Are you seeing some interest, some mandates from the publishers to include accessibility, or are you doing that from a Gearbox software level?
Both. We during the development of Borderlands 3, there was some discussion with the publisher about how can we look at the game from that perspective, from an accessibility perspective. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to explore the Atmos stuff. I wanted to explore what that meant and how that could help. Being able to, and it, honestly, to speak to Rob's point, it very much is an improvement just as a game itself, just as a sonic presentation. I mean, all of the investment into looking at different ways to present information in a 714 format even revealed a lot of things about the mix that we hadn't heard before in a horizontal plane, and allowed us to sort of be more precise and sort of pull out some of the things that weren't spatializing properly once we opened up the heights. So I think that the technology, the role of technology, the role of spatial formats, it increases our awareness of just what the sonic profile is, in which case, we can keep digging deeper into how to present that information, not only to players at the sort of general level, but also looking at accessibility. And it just improves the overall sonic presentation.
Cool. Do you feel like you have the tools that you need for that today, or is that something that can be enhanced as well? Is that something middleware can help, or What do you think? I don't know, Mark, let's stick with you for that one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the sophistication of being able to pinpoint and hone in on spatialization of objects in a program like WWise, that technology certainly allows us to get as refined as we want to be, and I think that will only continue. I also think there's a world where obviously a lot of players are playing on headphones. So even mixing and authoring in a discrete 714 environment, like there's a lot of consideration to be given there. Looking at the mobile platforms, players are playing a lot of casual games. So I think it's harder to convince people to be involved in audio in the casual world. But as the mobile platforms increase, as Jay pointed out, processors get faster. It's more of the AAA sort of presentation of games on the consoles, I think, are making their way to the mobile platform, in which case then it becomes questions of things like latency and other things like that. But I think that people will get more involved in sort of wanting to hear what's happening. It becomes more important and more of a priority.
Yeah. Jason, did the Able Gamers experience surface any extra tools, any extra layers of work that you already had in studio, or maybe tools that you needed to go get and integrate, or are you still thinking about that?
I haven't actually been through the course. It was two people. It was actually our technical sound designer and somebody from production that was through it. So no tools I'm aware of. It was really just kind of changing how we think about things. It requires more involvement from more departments, more support from programming. If I'm currently developing an idea to try and help make music more applicable to people who can't hear, people who are deaf, and so that's going to require more support from our audio programmers, probably more support from VFX programmers. So it's just kind of, I think overall it requires a lot more help from other departments and more collaboration.
Gotcha. Yeah. Just as a side note, one of the things that has put accessibility at the top of my discussion list most all the time is the GameStack presentation Microsoft had this year about don't design with us without us. And I don't know if you've seen the game Pitch Black, but it's a really good walk in our shoes kind of experience. Not to promote any one game, I've spent a little while playing it. It is a difficult way to play by sound. You take the eyes out of the picture, and it's a changed landscape. So to me, it was an interesting experience to walk through something without sight and try to figure out how to play the game. So much harder. So I can see that there's a lot of work to be done there, but interesting work and fascinating work. I'll move on to the next topic and stop filibustering. Mark and I had a really cool conversation that I think reflects the wisdom of people who work in content organizations. Y'all are working with really large teams with different angles on creativity everywhere, and it's many people make up a story. And so Mark and I were talking about how do you serve your content? You're charged with bringing up this audio picture that's the product of a giant team of people. Mark, do you want to go first with that one? Because I think you really had an interesting point about that started with some of your musical work.
Yeah. So Andy and I were talking about an interview that I had read with a drummer, but he was talking about how he had been hired to play live for this act, and they got into the studio, and he played with them for a day or so, and the leader of the band said, "Hey, we're going to bring in some other guys to just do the studio work." That at first was very discouraging to him, but he stuck around. He wanted to listen to what these other guys were doing. The point of the story is what he came out on the other side with is that the other drummers were not serving themselves and their background; they were serving the song. The intent of the feel and all of those kinds of things required a certain presentation, and he was very steeped in kind of a fusion background, and that fusion background wasn't working here. I relate that to games in the sense that a lot of times, in order for us to, I think, orchestrate or arrange the game, there's a lot of crosstalk between other departments. So in other words, like maybe narrative is thinking about what they want to achieve, but they're also trying to place dialogue where there's combat. So now you've got to duck all of the combat. The weapons start to feel small. The combat doesn't feel visceral. It pulls you out of the experience. And that's an example of I think what everybody kind of gets into, because you get into your portions of the game, whether it be level design or art, excuse me, or narrative, and you sort of get focused on that. But then when you kind of put all of those pieces of the puzzle together, sometimes they collide, and especially in a sonic perspective, there's things going on from the visual standpoint that don't necessarily align with what we're trying to say to the player and what the cleanest presentation is. And so I always try to look at, and I've encouraged my guys to kind of look at when they're playing through the game, look at those moments where things feel confusing or not clear, or you don't understand the objective, and not just from a gameplay perspective, but just from a sonic perspective, and try to dissect, like drill down into what all is happening during that time, and is it a coordination of efforts, or is it just an audio thing? So as opposed to just ripping stuff out from an audio perspective, maybe the problem could be solved a better way. But in the end, it's about serving the game. It's about making the best experience for the player, and sometimes that experience from an audio perspective isn't just about audio. So that's kind of the background of that. That's where that came from. But I thought it was an interesting topic because I know it's something that we've all encountered and something that we've all experienced. So yeah.
Jason, I saw you nodding a couple of times there. Do you find, and I've seen how your teams work too. It's like one big family at Avalanche, at least in New York City. Do you pull people together to kind of have that holistic review of what's too much, what's enough? You know, who needs to back up a little bit?
Absolutely. Something that I'm throughout. Typically, what we'll do is we will have regular reviews of sound within the sound team, and just it's kind of like an open format. Somebody will go through and say, okay, this is what I worked on this week or these past 2 weeks or whatever, and then we'll all sort of contribute our feedback and see how we can help them make it better. But yeah, I think some of the things I was nodding to while Mark was speaking was just that whole idea of finding moments, especially towards the end of developing a game, where things just aren't fully fleshed out as they could be. You know, there's moments, especially in level development, where you are, as a player, it's kind of chaotic what's going on. Maybe there's a big battle going on. There's lots of gun. It's sort of like they've just opened the floodgates in terms of enemies and challenges and all stuff. And so up until that moment, maybe you've been supporting all those sounds in small pieces, and now all of a sudden everything's opening up. And so in those moments, yeah, you've got to think about, all right, well, this is what we've done up until now, but we have to think more towards, as Mark said, serving the game, how we're supposed to be helping the player, and all the sound is just kind of making things more chaotic, and it's costing more processing. So it's actually, it's diminishing the experience on a number of different levels. So, you know, while maybe it wouldn't be ideal, and we should work with other disciplines to help figure out a better way to control the chaos. Sometimes you just have to start tearing stuff down and then build it up slowly, just to make it for a better experience for the player.
Yeah. Jay, I'd imagine that's a much more, front of mind kind of thought for you if you're going into mobile and kind of getting used to the model now. Are you approaching control of chaos yet?
Well, it's definitely, I'm gonna have to think about things differently in a mobile world than I had to in, say, Destiny 1. But even in Destiny 1, just going back a few short years, like, we capped the voices pretty severely. I just said, look, you're not going to get more than 32 voices or 40 voices or whatever we ended up at. And when you're saying, hey, you're not going to allow any more than that to play, you have to be super careful about what's heard. And then you get into priorities, which is something that Wise does really well. A lot of these middlewares do very well. And once you can, it's really all about setting the prioritization. So saying like, yeah, I know that there's shell casing sounds there every time I fire the gun, but they're not important in the middle of a pitched firefight. So just don't play them. And those are important choices that I think have to be made at the console level as well, but are going to be even more important. You're correct in mobile, where you're really going to have to limit how much stuff that you play back at a time, and making sure that it's super pertinent to what they need to be hearing.
Yeah. Rob, I know you work with all the first parties, so you probably have a lot of feedback about chaos.
Yeah, and a wide range of opinions about the chaos. You have some audio directors that are saying, I want 355 voices, and I'm going to play them all, and I'm going to mix them all together, and others that are more about finally controlling that chaos, going down in the realm of 48 voices. But also to speak a little bit to what Jason and Mark were talking about in terms of collaboration, making sure that we as a game overall are working with our other components of the game building team. I remember, this is going back a ways, but I got crap from my manager at EA saying, why are you not in your office 40% of your time? Because I'm out trying to figure out and work with all the other teams to understand and anticipate what's going to be happening. Jay could probably relate. We were both there at that time, and that's all these things of us internally making sure we're controlling the chaos, but also being part of the team and being super proactive amongst the different areas of a team, because audio is always last in the pipeline, right? We always react to what everybody else brings to the game, and the more that we can anticipate those things, anticipate changes that might be coming, the better off we are as audio directors and designers.
It sounds an awful lot like, taking on the audio effort is really a diplomatic job as well as a technical job and pure in-course work. It sounds like you really have to know what the other teams are doing by the time you start working an audio track for any game. Anybody, if you want to weigh in on that, please.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And I think especially the more communication you can have among the rest of your team, the better chance you're going to have. But I loved Rob's story about half your time is really spent out in the rest of the company trying to figure out, what things they're doing, and God forbid, what little pet projects that you haven't even heard about. I think one of my favorite stories along this line was there was one release of in the Destiny 2 realm somewhere in there, and I got a bug right before we were going to release to marketing, and the bug was the bullet impacts in the ice rink show dirt proofs and sound like dirt instead of ice when you shot the ice rink. Unfortunately, at that point, my reply was, who put a ice rink in the game without telling the audio director that, that they were going to put it in an ice rink? And I said, this is a simple fix, guys. And we were only like a week from cert or something like that. And it was like, all right, you only have two choices. Either you're going to block it off that you cannot go in the ice rink, you'll just be able to look at it from outside, or you're going to fix it. And they fixed it. They were very reluctantly, but I said, look, it's the easiest fix in the world. All I have to do is to say, this, not dirt, is ice. Like, it's a piece of cake. And they let us fix it. But it was one of those things where if I had ran into somebody who was working on that ice rink, I probably would have known that ahead of time instead of just before we were supposed to release.
Do you think they were maybe chasing an idea of Destiny on ice at some point? Bad idea.
Well, it was. I think it was the Valentine's Day one or something. Anyway, it was middle of winter, and so there was They just shifted something. They decided they're going to put an ice rink at the tower. Great idea, no problem. But it'd be great if you let us check to make sure everything worked.
Jason,
Anyway.
the same question back to you again, or the same point back to you anyway. That diplomatic role. I know you're in a pretty tight office, but you also have teams over in Sweden, which is not exactly a walk next door, and the time shift and everything else. It's got to be hard to manage that.
Yeah, it is. It's challenging. It's a challenge I enjoy, the diplomacy of it all. But I love working with other disciplines and just kind of sharing information and sort of helping them out, but also going to them, hey, we need help with this. Can you guys change this, or can you alter that? And just kind of figure out ways to solve problems collaboratively. I mean, it's one of the things I think that many people enjoy about game development. It's just you're working with these larger teams and you're not so isolated just to your discipline.
Yeah. Mark, I've seen the same at your offices too, when you have the guys from Quebec, right, in town, and then the rest of the studios kind of working together. Those have to be moments that you either cherish or are terrified by, because you'll hear feedback about, oh crap, we got to launch something tomorrow and we got to change all this stuff. Do you get that often, or do you stay in touch more often?
I stay in touch more often. I find that I find the more I stay in everybody's sort of path, the more they trip over me. So they start after a while to understand that I'm there. But I honestly, I think the other thing too is with the way audio technology is moving, not only on the implementation side, but with Atmos and other things like that, I think there's a lack of education that sometimes happens for the other disciplines. And so, like, after we completed the 714 room, we started pulling people in for various bugs or other conversations, sort of playing things for them. The hope there is to have them better understand sort of where we're going, and also look at opportunities for them from a level design perspective. Like, maybe it's cooler to have that ship fly overhead now, or maybe it's cooler to do this other thing that they typically wouldn't go to as an idea or solution. So I think education in part plays. Like, we can talk about how to solve specific problems all day long, but I think if there's a lack of context for really what we're trying to do, sometimes it makes those solutions harder to understand, or the reasoning behind why I need some support or change to happen for a specific thing. So yeah, it kind of is one, the diplomacy of addressing the issues that come up and trying to get ahead of things, but the other is trying to envelop people in the process so that they feel more connected to what our end goals are.
Gotcha. I think I have my first quotable out of all this. Actually, there's lots of quotables so far, but the more you stay in the way, the more they trip over you. I think I love that.
I like that.
It's a great. I will be stealing that.
Is that open source?
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever said that before, so I'm not sure where that came from. But
you heard it here first, folks.
Well, that's what it feels though, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Stay in the way, otherwise you're out of the way.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind. It happens really quickly too.
Yeah. Huh, cool. Well, all right. There's the elephant in the room, and I'm going to ask it. I have a COVID question because that's the topic du jour and has been for months. Things have gotten weird, right? Like, we got used to working in our offices and doing our stuff. Jason and I would have calls in our offices and hear dueling sirens from the city behind us. And now we're all locked up at home, or, in Mark's case, locked up alone in the studio. How are you getting work done? Like, I know it's a challenge, but how's it working for you? Rob, why don't we start with you?
For me, I spent 11 years in my own home studio doing work with my company. So and that was a long time ago, but those muscles did not atrophy too badly. So I'm used to that. I also have the space and the equipment that I need to get my job done. But I've talked with a lot of our studios, our first party studio audio guys, and it's a variety of issues that have come up. I think the hardest one is that has been expressed to me, and we're trying to find ways through Microsoft tooling and stuff like that to help out with this, is just how do I listen to my mix? How do I understand how the game actually sounds? And then the step beyond that is, how do I do this together? I mean, we've all had those crunch times where we're doing final mixes on games and 3 or 4 of us are in the studio and we're working together and listening and tuning and tweaking, and that's just not happening now. So, you know, I think with like Mark being able to go to his work studio and have that space is great, but not everybody has what they need.
No, that's an aberration.
Yeah.
Jay, how about your teams? Are they distributed? Are they working remotely? And are you figuring out ways to make it work?
No, everyone's remote. But the co-founder or the founder of Industrial Toys, Alex Seropian's co-founder of Bungie originally, and for many years also run a company called Wide Load Games after he departed from Bungie. And his philosophy has always been, have a small hardcore group. Yes, they have an office here in Pasadena, but they do a lot of outsourcing. A lot of people, there's a lot of mobile, there's a lot of there's a lot of meetings that are happening online, so on and so forth. Always has been. So the culture is really set up well for working individually. So far, this feels pretty good. I don't have the full-blown studio that I will eventually need as I get into, we will be back in a studio at some point. And I don't know when that'll be, but I miss seeing all the other people on the all the other people on the team, necessarily from day to day. I miss that camaraderie, but as far as work-wise, like it's going well. Yeah, the only downside for me is I'm in a small apartment waiting for my stuff to get here from Scotland. So
you got forced into the Marie Kondo thing, didn't you? You just got rid of everything.
No. So yeah, it'll be nice once we reach our final destination, so to speak.
Yeah. But Jason, this sounds like it makes the diplomacy all the more important these days too. If you're distributed and you can't all meet in a common area, you just have to stay on people.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've been dealing with for a while. Our current project is we're doing a lot more co-development between Stockholm and New York. So currently everybody's work from home. It's in a certain way, it's leveled the playing field where we're sort of all working as a group together rather than New York working as a group and Stockholm working as a group. So it came at a weird time, but it sort of worked for the stage of production we're at on our current title. The one thing I noticed is that, a lot of the audio people on my team don't have, decent home setups. They've got maybe nice headphones, but, very few of them have near fields that, speakers that they can utilize. So it's sort of, you raise the question and it sort of got me thinking, stuff that would be helpful is companies that could provide guidance, like maybe one in particular, Andy, in terms of home setups. And I know that, like, for instance, Dolby's been, they made their they built their business on cinema support, and I know you guys have been supporting game development a lot more over the past 5-6 years. But sort of recognizing that while far less than ideal, the home space that people have, or just smaller audio workspaces that people have to work with, while they're not ideal, it's sort of reality. So how do we make the best of it? Because I know just even before COVID, the New York studio for Avalanche it's not small, but the space we have to work for that we have to dedicate to audio, it's very limited. New York real estate comes at a premium, as it does in San Francisco and some other cities throughout the country. So for a game company to get behind its audio department and say, yes, we will dedicate this large room, it's hard for them to understand, and it's difficult for audio directors, sound designers to justify, even though the physics are there, right? You can't get around physics. But that being what it is, it's just kind of the reality of your surroundings. I don't know when we're going to go back into the studio. Currently, I have more working space at home for a studio set than I did at the office, so I'm better off in that regard, and I'm not itching to go back anytime soon. So I'm going to kind of keep trying to make what I have at home better in terms of working. So while for a long time I just never thought that I've worked from home before, and while I was a freelancer in games, and I have a legitimate working environment, and it's not something I put focus on really for a while. But now that we're here, it's just kind of like, all right, well, this isn't so bad. Why don't I make the best of it and just try and improve upon it?
Makes sense. And good advice there about guidance for the right setups for home too. We probably should be getting on that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Mark, I think you kind of typify, or you're the atypical one in the group right now. You're actually in your studio. I think that probably reinforces how important that space is, but it prompts the question. If we start to, do everything in a distributed fashion, what can't be gotten rid of? It's probably that mixed facility, right?
I mean, like in this particular situation, like these mixes had to be done on site. Otherwise, deadlines would not be met, or we ship in a different format than we've shipped with in prior DLCs and main game. One of the things that was interesting when COVID, when the studio essentially shut down, was VO, because we record and direct all of our VO, or a good majority of it, on site in our booth and control room here. So we opted to do a poll of the actors that were involved in the upcoming project. In that poll, we talked about home setups. We talked about what type of spaces they had, those kinds of things. And based on those requests, we ended up putting together VO kits. So for the actors that weren't able to access recording studios and did not have a home setup, we send them a recording kit. It has stands, has a tablet, so we can direct via Teams or Skype, microphone, headphones, the whole thing, as well as like an H6 handheld that mounts to the stand. We wanted something that was extremely hardware based and totally simple. No software, no waveform editing, no nothing like that. So they just hit basically record and stop on the H6, upload those files, we get those, we cut them up, we leave those kits with the actors for a week, so that in case the files have a problem, or the room they're in has a problem, which has been probably more the case, we're able to react to that and have them like jump into a closet or whatever. The setup is super portable. But anyway, that's just kind of a fire that was immediate for us, because we had just come off the tail of main game. We had these DLCs to ship, and nobody wanted, like, obviously we had to look at ways to try to make those deadlines work. As far as the mixing end of things, like this really, what I'm doing here today is the only reason that I come in. Outside of that, all my guys are working from home. They seem to be comfortable. One thing that's been a ramp up is compatibility of things like plugins, and in some cases, like they wouldn't have, they'd be working on Reaper at home, which we do a lot of our stuff in New Window, and they wanted to have that same setup at home and be redundant. So then, they have to upgrade that kind of stuff. And, Gearbox as a whole has been super helpful. The IT department has helped with everything from SSDs to video cards to whatever people need in order to be operational at home. And of course, with working inside the game engine, that's super CPU intensive. So it's, a lot of folks didn't have quite the horsepower to meet that. So that's been another challenge as well. But I would say, like, sort of looking at the trend of productivity and flow, I think there's actually been some positive outcomes to an extent. Like, there's guys that are like audio QA, or other guys that don't necessarily meet for our audio meetings, or they're on a different floor or whatever, that I wouldn't see except for maybe once or twice a week. We do an audio call at 11 every single day. And it's just a chat. There's no agenda at all. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. But all of those guys that I hardly saw were now on this call, and I can feel that sense of connection there that I don't think that they had before. And I think, like, moving past COVID, like, I definitely want to bring those practices back into the studio in a live setting. And I think not only has it become important to me and I've seen change, but I think the guys have seen it change, and that level of connectivity just as a team. So I think that there are some silver linings. I think that it's changing the way we're going to work when we're back in the studio. And I think it's also going to change the expectation of output being offsite versus onsite. So it's been difficult. And of course, home environment, if you have kids, there's kids. And if dad's home, they want to talk to dad. And they know I'm just right through that door. So, which is great. Like, it's great being with them all the time. But nonetheless, it makes things difficult at times. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I don't think it's all like the pandemic itself, I think is horrible, and what it's doing to the country and the world in general. But I do think it's teaching us some lessons.
Yeah, that's interesting that you have to leave the office to come back together and kind of find these things out. And I think we're all seeing elements of that too. I know at Dolby we have a lot more cross connectivity in meetings. It's just funny, you have to go away to come back. I think we're down to, I'm sorry, I think we're down to last questions here. And so, is there a topic anybody on the call wants to talk about? I have a pithy last question, but it's only a joke, so I'll let that one go. Any topic on the tip of anybody's tongue that we didn't cover? All right, it's getting a little quiet. What are Foley guys doing working from home? Are we just paying damage deposits on apartments right now so they can keep breaking stuff? Foley is one of those things. I think I've told you all, I love watching Foley guys work because it probably means I'm a destructive human being at my very core. But to me, that is always the most entertaining thing.
I think it's always fun to break stuff, right? People kind of get your yayas out.
Yep.
I will say though that from a recording a Foley standpoint, some of my guys have come up with some pretty interesting content from things around the house. Like, we have a little stage here that we record on, and I think sometimes the inconvenience of like bringing that prop to the studio, then going through the recording process. These guys are just using a D50 or something, and or an F8, and they're recording stuff on site and at the house, and then automatically walking into their office or their room where their computer is, and then getting it into the computer and then working with it. Like, there's something to be said for that sort of immediacy of creativity that I think is really cool. And some of the content sounds super. So that's cool.
That's awesome. It fills my heart with joy if I know the Foley guys are still making crazy noises from home too.
Absolutely. I don't think you can stop them.
Well, all right. I think we've hit the end of our time allotment here. So guys, thank you very much for joining. I always like talking to you anyway, but I think you guys bring a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom about game audio and games in general. And this has been informative for me especially. So thanks for your time. And thanks to the guys at White Knights as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, White Knights.
It feels like you have so many stories, and just, wow, it's crazy that you could just, I don't know, keep on telling us different stories for many, many, many hours. That's how it felt to me. I don't know.
I didn't get to the war stories question. I'm kind of bummed out about that one, but next
Yeah, me too.
Well, probably we should do it next time then, to have a bit of more discussion going on. All right, we have only, I think, time for a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So the first one from Remy Layobi. What is your guys' opinion on haptics, vibrations, especially on mobile? Wouldn't it facilitate accessibility, resolve some of the sound ducking issues, and create a way to communicate with gamers who turn the sound off?
Rob, you want to go first?
I love the idea of haptics. I think that physical connection to sounds can really enhance things. And we see the basics of it with our controller rumbles and stuff like that. But that's we talked way earlier about future looking with audio and gaming. Haptics is actually a very interesting space that I think could be greatly expanded upon.
Jay, you look like you wanted to get in there.
Yeah, I totally agree with Rob. Like, I think haptics is something we've really only scratched the surface on. It's only been in the last, group of years that you can actually trigger things via the haptics in Wise, correct? And I haven't even messed around that much with it, but it's definitely, there's a lot more to be done there, I think.
Yeah. Mark, Jason, are we going back to rumble seats?
We are. No. Yeah, one of the things that we've played with a little bit, and I would like to investigate further, is even identifying different classes of weapons by the duration of rumble, of controller rumble, and that sort of haptic feedback. Like an assault rifle has a really short burst, a shotgun maybe a little longer. Those kinds of things. I think that those kinds of things would be super helpful for accessibility. And folks that don't necessarily have the sight that they need to have in order to see the level of detail. But yeah, haptics is definitely a thing. I'm surprised we didn't even, like, none of us really didn't come to front in the accessibility conversation. But it's a great question. Yeah, absolutely.
Jason, thoughts?
Yeah, it's not something I've focused a lot of my attention on. But it's definitely, it's another sense that we could take advantage of in terms of communicating information to players. So I think haptics are great. It's kind of a weird blanket statement to make, but it's definitely something I'd like to explore more on a project when I have time.
I'm thinking in Just Cause specifically, haptics for me would be a mild electric shock every time I slam Rico around, and maybe I'll learn to stop doing that.
It's one way to go. Torture through haptics.
That's right. Did training, negative reinforcement training.
Yeah.
Elena, did we have any other questions?
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, guys. Actually, another one from Denise Lobin. A question to Jason, actually. Engaging more mobile players to play with headphones is a great initiative. How do we balance the experience to not push away all the people who cannot play with sound on at the particular moment? Do we want to give a significant gameplay advantage to people who play with sound? And I can smell some resistance from the design production team.
Wow, that was a really long question. Sorry, what's that?
You want me to repeat it? Read it again.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so engaging more mobile players to play with headphones is a great initiative. How do we balance the experience to not actually push away all the people who cannot play with sound on at the particular moment? Do we want to give a significant gameplay advantage to people who do play with sound? Yeah, that's pretty much the question.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's an interesting point in terms of striking a balance between the different senses and who has access to them and who doesn't. There's certainly been a number of times when I've been commuting when I used to do that kind of thing, publicly, and there were people who didn't have headphones but would fully enjoy the sound on their game when I wish they wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we should necessarily limit the sound of a game just because certain people don't have access to sound, whether it's through disabilities or whether it's through just kind of limitations in the context of when you're playing the game, but rather turn our attention to ways that you can share that information that other disciplines don't think about, like the sound of a shotgun in terms of directionality or from enemy fire, how you can communicate that to the player through other disciplines, through other means. I don't know if anybody else wanted to jump in on that.
Okay.
Rob, it sounds like the audio visualization stuff you're talking about really applies here, where you take away the notion of audio being an advantage by providing that information via a different method.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's come up when we've had these conversations about visualizing sound specifically, is how much of that is a cheat, an advantage to the player, and that's why one of the most important parts of all of this is that we as the audio folks, but in conjunction with our overall team, design these things such that we are striking that balance between it not being a cheat or giving an advantage, but yet getting the information effectively across to those that need it.
Thank you very much, guys. Unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions, and we do have questions though. If you don't mind, please join us in the chats in the Q&A section section by the stream window, and if you could answer those questions, that would be just fantastic, because they're pretty good ones actually.
Okay.
Thank you for joining. Hopefully, we'll do this again sometime soon, maybe offline. How about that?
Sure hope so. That would be
Sounds
great.
good.
How about St. Petersburg? I heard it's a really nice city.
I hear the same.
It is. I've been there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, long time ago.
Wow, we should again. All right, thanks a lot, and that was a pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you, Elena. Boys,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.